Quick question. What does this movie, this movie, this movie, this movie, and this movie all have in common? Witty dialogue, dashing male lead, themes of courage and honor. Well, yeah, but all of them were written by the same guy, William Goldman. What can he teach us today about screenwriting from days gone by? I am Carl T. Rogers, a story philosopher, a writer and director helping you get ahead in your screenwriting career. If you're not familiar, William Goldman is one of the most acclaimed screenwriters of all time. He won Oscars in screenwriting for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and All the President's Men. He also wrote A Bridge Too Far, Maverick, The Ghost in the Darkness, Marathon Man, a lot more, and best of all, one of my favorites of all time, The Princess Bride. He also wrote a famous book about his experiences called Adventures in the Screen Trade. Is Adventures in the Screen Trade, which he wrote, decades ago, still relevant to screenwriters today? Well, let's see. First of all, the prose. Prose, not prose. See what I did there? It's got very witty writing. It's fun to read because Goldman has this very charming, witty voice, much like a lot of his witty dialogue. So, for example, he says, "Psycho, for me, remains unique. Maybe Hitchcock is the only director who could have pulled it off. After all, he spent half a century getting away with murder." Or how about this excerpt where he says in an example screenplay, "Cut to top of the hill as 50 camels come over the crest of the hill, bearing down on the joggers. More than likely, our studio executive will stop right there. He may even pitch the screenplay across the room," because of the way he just writes and has these very memorable examples. It's real fun to read. Another great thing about the book is it talks about the inner workings of a lot of these classic films that you may have seen growing up or may have studied. And one that he focuses a lot on is, of course, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. There's even a whole section of the book where it's got the full screenplay of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So you can read the whole screenplay as he wrote it and then have him kind of, after that, dissect what he likes and doesn't like about what he wrote in the past. And it's also a very encouraging journey to see how a writer who went from writing these obscure novels and really struggled to then becoming one of the most famous screenwriters of the 20th century. And the reason why I bring that up is because he often talks about how he struggled to write and how the business kind of for him went up and down, but he still made it work and still kept going and was a successful screenwriter through it all. Some of the cons of the book, though, I would say is, this first one could be kind of a pro or a con, depending on your taste. But like I said, there's a large focus on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and a lot of those older movies like that. So if you're reading, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid as he wrote it back in the day, the script formatting is very old in that way. It's not written like we do now. So in that way, I wouldn't look to it as a way to learn how to write, especially formatting. But if you want to learn more about formatting, then definitely suggest you check out my screenplay formatting playlist right up here. But it's still a great book to read, and script to read, of course, from a storytelling perspective. And along with that emphasis on Butch Cassidy, there's also an emphasis on a lot of films and actors and producers mentioned that might be kind of obscure to you today, especially if you're not really into film history from kind of Hollywood's golden days. But if you're really into that, then that's going to be, great for you. You can kind of see him peel back the curtain. But you can still enjoy the stories that he's talking about, even if you don't really know much about the people he's talking about, because it's still relatable. And so in that way, I think it's still a great read, especially if you like classic cinema and Hollywood gossip kind of stuff. I'll drop a link down below, an Amazon link if you want to get a copy of Adventures in the Screen Trade. I would say for me, though, the biggest con is that there's nothing in there about The Princess Bride, which is my favorite William Goldman film. So why is that? Well, the problem is William Goldman just didn't have a time machine. He was too busy writing screenplays to invent a time machine because this book wasn't even published until 1983. And even though he'd already written the novel, The Princess Bride, in 1973, the movie The Princess Bride didn't come out until 1987. So he kind of wrote the novel, and then he didn't do much with it. He wrote this book, and then later, after this book was published, made Princess Bride into a movie. If I want to get more details about The Princess Bride and what that was like, I guess I'd have to read the sequel to this, which is called Which Lie Did I Tell? More Adventures in the Screen Trade, which came out in the year 2000. If you've read that sequel, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Let's talk about takeaways. We've talked about the pros and cons. Let's talk about what we can learn from this book. The biggest takeaways for you as a screenwriter trying to get your career off the ground. First of all, writing takes work. Duh. But the reason I emphasize that is because You know, it's easy to look at these people who are successful, whether they're successful now or successful in the past, and think, oh, it just came easy for them. Well, no, it's hard for everybody, even somebody as talented as William Goldman. He says this: the writing is never what takes the most time. It's trying to figure out what you're going to put down that fills the days. With anger at your own ineptitude, with frustration that nothing is happening inside your head, with panic that maybe nothing will ever happen inside your head, with blessed little moments that somehow knit together so that you can begin to visualize a scene. That's how he described it. So if he's won these Oscars and is still struggling to write his next screenplay, it's okay if you're struggling a little bit too. And on that note, I would say another takeaway from this book is that you're never satisfied as an artist. And even though he won an Oscar for Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, won the Oscar for Best Screenplay, there's still stuff that he talks about in here that he wishes he could change. Their first words when they're mortally wounded fills me with despair. Or what about the entire section of the South American bank robberies? Obviously, those scenes were the best I could do. I just wish I'd done them better. So if William Goldman can say that about one of those important and recognized films and screenplays, then that gives me hope. The last takeaway I have for you is that the more things change in Hollywood, the more they stay the same. The politics, the money, the constant on and off again nature of films getting greenlit and then put on pause and then changing producers, all that stuff that he talks about in his book, that still happens today. And Goldman says this. He says, money today, as it always has been, is the essential glue that binds the movie powers to each other. So why is that? You know, we're talking about art, stories, all this stuff, but ultimately, screenwriting is a business. Movies are made to make money. And so while us screenwriters are thinking about the world building and the characters and the emotions, the industry that bankrolls these movies, even if it's an indie movie, still want to know that the script can become a film which will turn a profit. That's a constant of the screen trade up until now and into the foreseeable future. However, the business itself, the way that happens, has changed a ton since Goldman wrote this back in 1983. I mean, that was 40 years ago. So if you want to learn how to succeed today as a screenwriter in the post-COVID era, then click up here to watch my masterclass called How to Launch Your Screenwriting Career Without Having to Move to LA. Okay? I'll see you over there.